Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Dr. Daria Brzezinski with Children Come First. We're here every Tuesday from 10 to 11 a.m., broadcasting on issues regarding children, education, preventative health, and all the other issues around children and raising children. Today we have as our special guest Jerry Minitz from New York. Good morning, Jerry.
Good morning.
And Jerry is president of AERO. AERO is the Alternative Education Resource Organization, and it also is a periodical that we'll be talking about a little bit later in the show. Jerry, I've known for years. He has traveled immensely. He has helped school districts, both public and private, and from around the world, open up alternative schools. And by alternative, I'm speaking of progressive, not necessarily at risk, that some people consider alternative. And Jerry, we're going to talk a little bit about your work and some of the things that you've been doing and are doing around the world. Jerry, can you tell us a little bit about the Alternative Education Resource Organization, what it is and what it's all about?
Okay, well, we are a networking organization. We're kind of the hub of communication for people involved in different sorts of educational alternatives in the United States and around the world. This would include everything, for example, from, say, Montessori schools and Waldorf schools to homeschooling. It would include charter schools and public and private alternatives, even at-risk type alternatives and higher education alternatives. So what we do is people contact us through our website or our 800 numbers or through having heard about us in various books, and will ask us, for example, about certain resources. They'll ask us, for example, how they can find an alternative school near them, or how they can start homeschooling, or how they can start a new school, and we try to provide information to help them do these things.
Now, Jerry, you published a book of alternative schools around the country. What was the name of it?
It's the Almanac of Education Choices, and it has over 6,000 alternatives. It's by state and in zip code order, and that was originally published by Macmillan.
Now, let's talk a little bit about some of the things that are happening around the world. Let's start with Russia and your work in Russia. Can you tell our audience some of the things you're doing in Russia?
Well, my connection with Russia actually started back in 1991. And somebody had received a flyer saying that they were going to have the first New Schools Festival in the Soviet Union. Well, I thought, this is ridiculous. I mean, I go to all these conferences, but I had never thought about going to Russia. Nobody knew anything about alternatives in Russia at that point, but it kind of bugged me that that's something we should know about. And finally, I called the contact person in Holland who was trying to arrange for people outside of Russia to go. And I wound up going to Russia, and there was a student who had done some traveling with me, and he wanted to go also, even though I warned his parents. I didn't know what was going to happen there and so on, but he traveled with us before, and so they said no, they weren't concerned. And so we decided that we didn't want to drop into, just kind of drop out of the sky into Russia, so we wound up flying to England and taking a train from there to Russia, starting actually going across the channel and then taking the train from Belgium. And it was an amazing experience, just the train trip itself. And then from there, we went from Moscow down to the Black Sea, to the Crimea, and that's where this conference was held with 400 people and about 75 kids. And it was just amazing, just so eye-opening that what people were doing, and not having been in communication with us, nevertheless, they were doing some great things in alternative education. And it's interesting. After we got back from that conference, to Moscow, we wanted to take the train back, and they said, "Oh, sorry, you can't do that now. You didn't reserve it." And we said, "We have to take this train because otherwise we won't be able to connect with our plane to get back from England." And they said, "Well, maybe if you stay in line, for a while, you can do that." Well, we went we stood in line and nothing happened, so we went to see the boss and said, look, this afternoon we're having a meeting in Yeltsin's White House, which was true. Yeltsin was at that point interested in what we were doing, this conference, and he said, well, in that case, we'll put you first on the waiting list. And so we went to that conference and then called from there, and they said, yes, you can come get tickets, and we went down and got the tickets and got on the train the next day, and when we got back into England, we discovered there'd been a coup, and where we were standing at Yeltsin's White House the day before was where Yeltsin was standing on the tank the very next day.
Now, the school in Russia is a private school? Is it a public school?
Well, there are many alternative schools in Russia, but one of the ones, for example, that I met there, or found out about there, was the one called the School of Self-Determination. And it was directed by a guy by the name of Alexander Tubelsky. And it's in Moscow. It's an inner-city school in Moscow, public school with 1,200 students, K to 12. At this school, the decisions are made democratically, and the students have a constitutional right to leave any class they want without explanation, as any adult would, and they vote on which teachers they're going to hire to teach them in their classes the next terms.
Now, are those students allowed to get diplomas and be accepted in society in Russia?
Oh, yeah. It's a regular public school.
Well, because I know in Japan, in some instances, children who attend alternative schools do not get diploma.
Well, this is a public alternative school. It's part of the regular school system in Russia, so they have no trouble with that. Now, we also discovered some people at this conference from something called the Stork Family School, which is in Ukraine. And a group of parents in Ukraine had started a private school, one of the very first probably ever, in a town called Minitz, because they discovered a particular teacher that they wanted their kids to have, and it didn't work out that they could get her in the public school, so they went ahead and started a parents' cooperative, and this was even before the coup, and it's going to this day, and we've helped to keep them supported, and it's interesting, it's been quite a struggle for them. At one point, the government was taking 86% of their tuition in taxes. Can you believe that?
Unbelievable.
And so, but the school is going fine. And in fact, last summer, we had a conference there of the International Democratic Education Conference. And this is a conference that meets every year of democratic schools and homeschoolers. And people thought it was impossible to have a conference like that in the Ukraine, but we got people there from 9 countries and had several hundred people at this conference. It was just fantastic. They
Who
were there
sponsors that conference?
Came from Israel and from Russia and from Japan and New Zealand. And this summer there's going to be another conference at Summerhill School in England of the same group.
Who sponsors that conference? Is there an organization?
It's just a kind of a grassroots organization that's organized by the people themselves who go to the conference.
Of 9 different countries?
Yeah.
Now, why don't you talk a little bit about most of the people in our audience don't know what Summerhill is, probably don't, maybe have heard of it in passing.
Right. Well, Summerhill, without Summerhill, we might not have had any alternative schools or free schools, and would not have had homeschoolers or charter schools, because Summerhill started 78 years ago in England by A.S. Neal, and what happened is that he had been a school teacher, and decided that he didn't like the way school was running, and so he started this really radical school which runs democratically and has non-compulsory class attendance, and it's been a tremendous success, and it's also been tremendously controversial over the years. In 1960 or 61, they published the book Summerhill in the United States for the first time, a compilation of some of his earlier books, and this started, it was just hit like a bombshell, and literally hundreds, maybe thousands of free schools were established that were kind of inspired by Summerhill. And as a result of this, this eventually led to the alternative school movement, where the public schools tried to make some changes. And then beyond that, to the charter school and homeschool phenomenons, which I think are all related to this. Now, Summerhill at the moment is under attack in England once again, and because they have established in England a national curriculum in which every child is basically forced to study this particular curriculum, and Summerhill has been trying to keep on going through all this, and it seems like the government is trying to make some kind of an example of them and saying, well, you can't have non-compulsory classes and still force them to go use our curriculum. And so this is another fight that's going on. People from all over the world are supporting Summerhill and writing letters and so on. And the thing about it is I think the people in the United States should be warned that if they allow this standards movement here in the United States to grow and go any further, that they may run into a similar situation in which you might get the government actually attacking private schools in which all the parents know what they're doing and sending their kids there because they choose to, attacking private schools on their philosophy. And I think this is the danger, and this is a warning.
How long has Summerhill been in existence?
78 years.
And they don't get the fact that 78 years of existence has any meaning?
I think they do get it, and I think that they're trying to make an example of them. I think that they're picking on this little 60-student school to try to throw around their weight and to show that the government can squash you if they want to.
Jerry, you do a lot of traveling with students. How important is travel, and what kinds of things do you do as far as the education curriculum for a child?
I think that experiential education is really important, and to see people, in the flesh. That is and I think it's important for students to be able to have this experience and to connect to other people doing other kinds of things also. I think that there's no substitute for that.
Were you at in the National Coalition Conference out in Colorado when Columbine happened?
Yes, I had brought a group of students out there. Actually, I was traveling with a group of students from a school in Albany, which is in itself quite an interesting school. And they had 3 of their staff and 9 of their students traveling, and we went by train. This is a school that's in inner-city Albany, has no minimum tuition, is an interracial school.
Is that Chris's school?
Yes, Chris
Mercogliano.
Chris Mercogliano. It's called the Free School. And this school was started by a woman who really started for her own kids.
Yeah, we've had Chris on the program.
Yeah, and a woman by the name of Mary Loya. And so the thing is interesting, this school doesn't have very much money, but several years ago when they decided they wanted to go to some of these national conferences, I showed them how they could get the money locally, because they don't really have the money individually, the kids don't really, to travel like this. And this is the way we used to do it in the school that I used to run in Vermont. And that is, each of the kids was given a sponsor sheet, and they could go around and get sponsors to help them go to a conference like this. And they also put on plays, and they had to have a big dinner, and they raised, I think, about $4,000 for 15 of them to go to, let's see, well, I guess it was 12 of them in the end, and then a couple others went on with this, to go by train to this conference and to cover all of the conference calls and a little trip afterwards in which they went first to New Mexico and Chicago. Well, we got to Denver, and we actually split up at that point. I went to visit my niece, whom I had actually homeschooled, and who was now studying pre-veterinary medicine in Colorado. And they went on to where they had planned to go, which was Jefferson County Open School, which is a public alternative school in Jefferson County. They were in that school at the time of the Columbine shootings. And I was in Colorado, again, Denver, at the same time. And it was just a stunning event.
Now, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, we've heard from several people. We've had Sandy Hurst on here and several other people, Tina Dawson, who were all out at Columbine together. And
what?
They were all out in Denver at the conference. And I wanted to ask you your opinion on how things like this can be prevented, in your opinion.
Well, you know, the thing that struck me as ironic is that here we were going to this alternative education conference in Colorado with people who basically have an approach which is the answer to these kinds of problems. And despite the fact that this was going on just a few miles away from where we were meeting, I thought we would be crawling with reporters. There were press releases put out and so on, and no reporter made their way up to where we were just a few miles away. It's just amazing. Now, at these schools, first of all, they're all small schools. They have processes involved with all of these schools for conflict resolution so that if there are problems that kids have and so on, they will be brought up. Issues, personal issues, things that kids are mad at and so on are all considered legitimate things to talk about and to discuss. Whereas, of course, at the school at Columbine, this not only were these kids' issues that they had with the discrimination they were feeling in their school not dealt with, but the principal didn't even know who they were and didn't know anything about their group. And it's just mind-boggling when you think about this. And I think that the fact is that there are kids, millions of kids, all over the country today who are very, very angry with being forced to be in a situation that is boring and irrelevant to them, and they just put up with this sort of incarceration in these, schools, which are really more akin to prisons in many ways. And just this anger builds up, and not only that, but kids who are natural learners over a period of time have, their interest and their excitement about learning just kind of extinguished. And I think that people aren't recognizing the anger that this generates. People talk about all of these bomb threats that happened after Columbine as copycat. But you didn't have the same kind of copycatting going on after the Oklahoma City Federal Building bomb. You didn't have a whole lot of those things going on. The fact that this so-called copycat thing happened was because there are just so many students out there in the country that are angry, that are disenfranchised, that are frustrated, that are damaged, and that have been hurt. And I think that this was basically them saying, we feel this way too. And I don't think it's been listened to. And all of the stuff that's happened since then, in which people talk about gun control, I mean, that certainly can be a factor. But the violence in the media, violence in kids' games. How come the fingers are being pointed in every other direction except for the direction that it should be pointed at, themselves, the schools? How come people aren't saying, well, this happened in schools? Kids are phoning in bomb threats to schools. Kids say they hate schools. Kids are natural learners. If they say they hate their schools, there's something wrong with their schools. And people just haven't really been looking at that. They haven't really wanted to look at that.
We're listening to Children Come First with Dr. Daria Brzezinski, WAAT 750 AM on your radio dial. We're here every Tuesday from 10 to 11 a.m., and we are talking today with Jerry Minitz, who's president of AERO, the Alternative Education Resource Organization, and we're talking about a variety of issues regarding education today. Jerry, can you please talk to us about some of the things that AERO has accomplished? Have you started your, I remember you were telling me about doing a program for students who had graduated from alternative schools. Are you compiling those youth together?
Yeah, we've started our Alternative Education Alumni Association, and we have a listserv, for example, of people who have been in alternative schools one way or another, or have homeschooled. And in fact, one of the big discussions that's going on in the listserv right now is how to support Summerhill. There are a number of Summerhill graduates that are part of this organization already.
What is the function of the Alumni Association?
Well, that's evolving. In other words, we've set up this listserv to initially to discuss how we want to do it and what services we want to provide. But ultimately, we would like to have this group of people who have been involved with alternative schools be available for this movement, to help people who are trying to start new schools, who are trying to change schools, or who want to homeschool, and also to keep them kind of in touch with what's going on, because most of the students who have experienced these things still believe in it and would like to support it, but after they've graduated, they don't always have a way of doing that.
How many students do you have here in your Alumni Association?
I don't know what the number is right now, but again, it's sort of in its preliminary stages. And to begin with, we didn't want to have huge numbers. We wanted mostly to have a dialogue going on to try to determine how we wanted to build it up. There are certain institutions that have committed themselves to having their students become part of it. For example, one of them is an alternative college that has 19,000 graduates. So it just gives you some idea. That's just one school. What the potential is for this. So this is something we're still working on. Whether we want to have it do lobbying or not, these are things we're still discussing within this group.
You are listening to Jerry Minitz, who is the Director, President of the Alternative Education Resource Organization. If you'd like to receive a publication from AERO, Jerry's phone number is 1-800-769-4171. That's 1-800-769-4171. Jerry, will you tell us your website, please, address?
Yeah, we have a website. Well, I have a couple of radio shows that I do that are called the Education Revolution. One is on the Talk America Network, and the other is on the Cable Radio Network. And both the shows are called the Education Revolution, and we have a magazine that's called the Education Revolution, and so therefore our website is edrev.org. That's www.edrev, as in Education Revolution, .org. And on that site, people can find a lot of information. There are bulletin boards for various types of alternatives and articles from our magazines and all that stuff.
All right. Now, what kinds of services do you provide in your magazine for people? I've seen different sections of your publication. What kinds of things can they find in your publication? Give our listeners a little bit of information.
Well, we have, for example, in the magazine, sections on people who are looking for jobs in alternative schools and jobs that are looking for people. In the upcoming issue, we'll have a report on the NCACS conference in Colorado and various articles about that. In fact, there's one that I wrote and then one that Chris wrote from our two different points of view. Very interesting. We have a new webmaster on our website who got a hold of an article that Chris wrote and posted it on our website, and I never read it till it was on there. And it was just interesting to read Chris's point of view about what they were doing, for example, at this Jefferson County school at the moment that all these shootings are taking place. And, for example, Chris talks about how all of a sudden they had this really strange feeling at the place. Everyone was whispering to each other and talking quietly and like they knew something was happening, but they didn't know what. And, of course, they finally approached them, and they had already made arrangements to sleep in the gymnasium of that school that night. And they did wind up sleeping there that night, but can you imagine, this was the night after all these this violence that had happened in another Jefferson County school, and they were under incredible security that night. They weren't allowed to go in or out without calling security first. And when I visited them a few days later when they stayed at the school after the conference, the same thing was true. The security had to be called anytime a door was going to be opened.
And that's Chris Mercogliano from the Alternative School in Albany, New York, you were referring to. Now, can you give us, we have a few minutes here before we have to talk about our sponsors here. Can you give us a little bit of information about some of the work that you have been doing in the past with regards to helping schools, upstart schools?
Helping schools what?
Upstart. I know you did some in Florida.
Oh, yeah. Well, we do, consultations for different groups who are interested in, as I say, starting new alternatives. I did one recently with a group of people in New York State, right on the Pennsylvania border, in fact, just across the border, in a town called Horseheads. And they will be, they have an after-school program that's been going for 20 years, SAT type thing and so on, tutorial program, one-to-one. And the parents had approached them and said, look, can't we expand this to a full-time school of some sort? So I went up there and did a consultation with them to talk about how they could set it up as a homeschool resource center in which the parents would all become homeschoolers, and they would, the teachers that were already there would work with their kids during the day as well as, with this after-school program. And so we had a group of parents that showed up. It was interesting. One of the parents was so excited about it, she said, gee, I was thinking about just doing this with this one of my kids who's a problem kid, but I want all my kids to experience this. And they're all set to go, and they'll be opening in the fall. So that's an example of the kind of thing that we do. I also did another consultation with a group up in Quebec. I had to go to a board meeting of a school in Vermont, and they asked me if I could just drive a little further north and meet with their group. And it was very exciting. I met with about 15 or 20 of them, including some students, and explained to them again how they could start a homeschool resource center, and they got very excited about it, and they're planning to go ahead with it and do it.
Sounds great. We have about 2 minutes here before our break. You are listening to Children Come First, WAAT 750 AM on your radio dial. This is Dr. Daria Brzezinski. We are here every Tuesday from 10 to 11 a.m. Today we're visiting with Jerry Minitz, who's president of AERO-Alternative Education Resource Organization. If you'd like any information about AERO or their publication, you may call them at 1-800-769-4171. That's 1-800-769-4171, or visit them at their website, which is edrev.org. If you'd like any information on any of our other broadcasts or information about someone you'd like to have on our broadcast, you may call us at area code 570-639-2931. That's area code 570-639-2931. We're going to take a short break and give a little bit of time to our sponsors, and we'll return with the second half hour of Children Come First, where we will be visiting with Jerry Minitz of AERO. Please return after our sponsor.
They came out against this whole movement because of that reason. And this was an organization of homeschoolers and alternative schools. Now, it's in Massachusetts. I've heard about this recently. I did a couple of shows on it recently. There is a new a test there that is just really draconian. This is a test that kids will take in 3 different grades. It takes 16 hours to go through this whole assessment, as they call it. And in the 10th grade, kids will take what they're calling this high-stakes test. If they don't pass this test, they don't get an academic diploma. This is being determined in the 10th grade. That's it. Their academic life is over. They won't get into a good college because they can't get an academic diploma if they don't pass this test in 10th grade. It's something similar to a system that they have in Europe, where they take the kids that are given tests early, and then only a certain number of them are allowed to go on, academically, and the others are siphoned off to flip burgers or whatever. And that's what's going to be happening in Massachusetts. Well, some kids have decided, and I think there are some teachers that feel the same way, have decided to protest this, and so they refuse to take the test. And there was also a very high degree of absenteeism on the days of these tests. But some kids specifically announced their refusal to take the test, and they have been suspended, and one of these kids was actually arrested and jailed. It's the most incredible thing. And I had one of those kids on my show. It was several parents. And this new test doesn't become official for another year or so. They're just trying it out now with these kids. But it takes 3 weeks of their classroom time away. And it's something that will probably start happening in other states unless people protest. And, you know, all this has, to me, a connection to Columbine. And that is that, as I said earlier, there are some really angry kids out there. There are some really frustrated kids. Now, what you saw in Columbine was kids who basically were so angry and frustrated they went ahead and killed themselves and others. But if kids got to the point, as some of these Massachusetts kids have, where they could understand they have a right to be angry about this and they have a right to do something about it, maybe they will take a more positive approach. I think that there's a connection, you see, between these two things. And I think when students come to understand that they have a right to be angry about this and their feelings are okay and that they need to do something about them, they will stop doing things that hurt themselves and others. And you'll maybe see some more positive action and positive changes. And I think it's maybe about time that kids reacted to this. I have this resolution, if you want me to read it.
Go ahead.
Okay, it says, this is resolution on national standards passed by the General Membership Meeting of the National Coalition of Alternative Community Schools, April 23rd, 1999. We represent alternative educators who are concerned that the imposition of federal and state standards has had a negative impact on our freedom and ability to effectively educate our children. Alternative education has been proven to work by every measure, and we do not want this external standardization imposed on us. Further, we are concerned that the impact of standardization on all students is demeaning to human dignity, creates winners and losers, and takes away self-respect. Children in schools are turned into numbers, and moreover, standardization effectively destroys equal opportunity in schools. Our educational methods and outcomes are different from those of conventional schools. We believe in a learner-centered approach to education, empowering each student to learn and to take responsibility for his or her own education. We measure the effectiveness of our schools by different standards. We call on other parents, students, teachers, and organizations to join us in promoting real learning and opposing standardization.
Now, you said this in what you just read, and you alluded to it before. What's the difference between learner-centered versus curriculum-driven? Most of our audience doesn't know that.
Right. Well, it's really just what it sounds like. In other words, people are natural learners. If the learning that they do is built on the things that they express interest in, and the teacher responds to that and helps them study the things that they're really interested in, ultimately all knowledge is connected anyway, and there's no way that we're going to ever learn everything we need to know. I mean, there's no way in this day and age with the information explosion that this is possible. Information doubles every 90 days or so. It's unbelievable what's going on. So what's most important is people retain their ability and their interest and their confidence in themselves as learners and their ability to teach themselves. And so this can happen if you're building on the people's interest and you're showing the students how to find the answers to their own questions. So that is a learner-centered approach. A curriculum-driven approach is in which the students are seen as kind of passive vessels in which you pour into them knowledge. And that's the difference really between the two.
Now, I've listened to you, and I wondered if you had any literature that parents might and teachers who are listening might be able to read and interested others regarding many of the things you've talked about here on the program. Do you have any books that you would recommend for people?
Oh gosh, there's an awful lot. I mean, you referred to Chris's book, Making It Up as We Go Along. I mean, that's one of them. Then there's the original. Well, there's the book Summerhill itself. If people want to understand the idea of Summerhill, there's a new version of Summerhill that was edited by Albert Lamb. There are just so many things. For example, these are all books that we carry here too. For example, we've got one called Campus Free College Degrees about how adults can get their degrees through distance learning. You see, it's almost an individual thing, but that's one of the things that we try to do is provide what people need. If people are interested in homeschooling, for example, we've got a book on how to start homeschooling.
What's the name of that?
And there's a chapter in one of our other books about it too.
What's the name of that one?
The book on homeschooling?
Yes.
I can't remember. It's something like Beginner's Guide to Homeschooling, and it's put out by Growing Without Schooling, Holt Associates, and it's just one of the books that we have, and if people want to start, there are 1.5 million people that are homeschooling today in this country, and 20 years ago there were maybe 20,000 people in the country homeschooling. So this is something that's really revolutionary.
I saw a report.
In fact, in California, there are so many people that are homeschooling that they have set up in California public homeschooling programs called Independent Study, where I think there are about 60,000 kids in it, because to try to get back the per pupil cost state aid that they've been losing in the process of all these people homeschooling independently. And so it's interesting that the homeschool movement has now been has helped redefine public education and to include homeschooling as one of the approaches that's legitimate.
I heard, I can't remember exactly where it was, but in the 1980s there were 15,000 students that were being homeschooled. And in 1997 there were 3 million. No,
3 million is too high an estimate, I think. But the latest estimate that I've heard, in fact, it was in the Newsweek article that our cover story that they had just a couple of months ago. They talked about 1.5 million. I don't think it's that number yet, but one of the big things that you're going to begin to see as there are more and more homeschoolers out there is homeschool resource centers. In other words, right now homeschoolers get together in groups, and they'll get together and go to a museum together or go on an outing somewhere. But I think you're going to see, and this is one of the things that we're helping people to do, you'll see more and more more formalized homeschool resource centers. There's one, for example, up in Massachusetts called Pathfinder, which is open 5 days a week, and kids can go in every single day if they want, and there are regular teachers there, but all of the parents individually are homeschooling, and they take the basic responsibility for their kids' education, so this can be seen as supplemental. And this is a similar kind of program to the one that we're helping them establish up in Horseheads, New York, just across from the Pennsylvania border. And I think in California, for example, there's one called Southside Center in Santa Cruz, and it is technically part of a charter school, and there are about 60 kids that go to this center, and it's a homeschool resource center that's opened, I think, 3 days a week. And so you're going to see more and more of this kind of approach happening as time goes on.
Now, are these homeschool resource centers done by the public schools?
The ones in California, the parents are still homeschooling their kids, but what they provide is for example,
Who's
a
they?
teacher that will help them write curriculum.
Jerry, who's they?
The public school system.
Okay.
It will provide a resource teacher who will come visit them once a week or something like that, will help them write curriculum. They have the right to go into the school and use school facilities and so on. Those programs are called Independent Study, and they are basically homeschooling through the public school system in California, and it's beginning to spread to other states. I know, for example, Iowa has something like that, and in Pennsylvania, the homeschooling movement is growing a lot, and there are certain places, schools, for example, that have homeschool programs. One of them is Apatina School, which is in Glenmore, Pennsylvania. And they have students who contact them and from all over the state and go there on a regular basis or homeschool from a distance.
You are listening to WAAT 750 AM on your radio dial. This is Children Come First with Dr. Daria Brzezinski. We are speaking today with Jerry Minitz, Director of AERO, the Alternative Educational Resource Organization. They have a publication if you'd like to call them about it. It's 1-800-769-4171. That's 1-800-769-4171. Or if you would like to speak to us here at Children Come First and any information that we can impart to you, our phone number is 570-639-2931. That's 570-639-2931. Now, Jerry, in this, you've talked a lot about testing and homeschooling and publication. What do you think is the thrust for the 21st century? Where do you think we need to go with public education, if at all? I know you're mostly involved with private and homeschooling, but where do you feel that we need to go in terms of education for the 21st century?
Well, that's actually not true. We are involved with public education in terms of public alternative schools and charter schools and all that. So I think that some people feel that the system is not salvageable. I think that maybe in its present form it isn't, but that there will be an evolutionary process through some of these new innovations that will probably change this system so that 20 years from now it won't look anything like it does now. But I think that citizens have to be just involved in the process of this change, or the changes that take place could be like these changes that are happening in Massachusetts, which are just really draconian. I think that they have to be involved and influence the process, or else that's what they're going to be facing. So it's you don't just sit back and wait for these things to happen, because the movements are almost in opposite directions, and I think we have to kind of moderate them and be involved. But the fact is that because of the information explosion, in order for kids to survive in the next century, they must be able to control their own educations and take responsibility for it through lifelong learning, because they think that the kids that are in school today, when they're working, they'll be having to go through at least 5 major job changes through their life. And they're going to have to be able to really learn some new things and adapt and change. And that doesn't, it's not the same as it was 50 years ago, where somebody was likely to stay in the same job throughout their whole working career. And so this is one reason why education has to change, and it has to happen as soon as possible.
One of my theories about people changing jobs so much is because we have moved away so much from students who have internships as well as mentoring programs in middle schools and high schools. Children don't get the opportunity anymore to explore different opportunities in terms of a career. They're basically being told what to do, and they become dissatisfied and jump from one career to the next in order to find something that they want. And I have a feeling if we can get back to the mentoring, if we can get back to the internship programs, we can, and give the responsibility of students to explore different alternatives. If we look at medical school, you don't have anything hands-on until many years down the road after the theoretical, as well as educators. Mostly in your junior year, you don't get hands-on experience. And so you've spent 2 or 3 years in the philosophical premise, and once you get into the hand-on, it's a very different and unique experience. So I really believe that once we get students back able to being in the community, in the workforce for the high school, middle school ages, we will have less and less of that transitionary from one place to another.
Right. Well, homeschoolers know this, and there are some homeschoolers that send their kids to a series of kind of work and mentoring experiences. I know a woman in Maine, Judy Garvey, has done this with her kids and has talked about it, and I think has written a book about it. And there are homeschool resource centers such as Puget Sound Community School in Seattle, Washington, in which the kids go 3 days a week to their program, and then the 4th day is an internship. And that's part of their program, and they are all, homeschoolers.
Now, wait a minute. What is the name of that school in Seattle, Washington?
Puget Sound Community School. But it is a homeschool resource center.
Oh, so this is not a public school?
No, that's not a public school. Public schools haven't seen, well, You know, there is a pioneering school in New York City that is a public alternative that's been going on for a long time. They're called City as School.
City as?
This is a public school program with 500 kids, and the entire curriculum consists of kids doing a series of jobs and getting credit for these job experiences and finding out what it is they're interested in doing. So it is being done in some cases in the public schools, but I think there are several other programs around the country that have replicated City as School, and they even, I think, have some grant money to help people do that if they want to set up public alternatives like that in their communities.
So these are public schools that have students out in the workforce in their high school years?
Yeah, well, not exactly in the workforce. I don't think they get paid for it. They do internships, and they go from one thing to another. There's a program that is set up that helps place these kids in all these different experiences, and they come together in their school once or twice a week or something, but most of their experience is out there actually doing something experiential. Now, of course, one of the pioneering schools for this was a college by the name of Antioch, and that was the program called the Cooperative Education Program, set up by
Ron Miller?
What?
Is that Ron Miller?
No. This is an Antioch University in Ohio, and this is Arthur Morgan, who did this in the 20s. He set up this program out there in the 20s, and that was the first college that really emphasized this, external education, this cooperative education in which the kids were getting a lot of their credit. I think about half of the time of students in Antioch is spent during in work experiences.
And this is at a university level?
Yes, at university level, and there are a number of other colleges.
Now, do they still do this?
What's that?
Do they still do this?
Oh, of course.
So this has been happening since the 1920s.
Since the 1920s, and there are a number of other colleges all over the country that still have programs similar to this. You know, one of the things that I might want to tell your listeners is that I put together a list of 10 signs that you might need to find a different kind of education for your child. Do you think people might be interested in hearing about this?
Probably.
Well, I'll just go through them quickly. One of them, of course, is what I've already said.
I would suggest you don't go through them quickly because maybe people would like to write them down.
Okay. Do your children say that they hate school? If so, something's probably wrong with their school. So if they say they hate school, listen to them. Don't just slough it off. There's no reason why kids should hate their school because kids are natural learners. Number two, do your children find it difficult to look an adult in the eye or to interact with children younger or older than they are? If so, they may have become socialized, so that very narrow group that children ordinarily interact with in school, they may be losing their ability to communicate with a broader group of children and adults. The third one is, do your children seem fixated on designer labels and trendy clothes for school? And this is a symptom of the shallowness of the traditional school's approach, and causing children to rely on external means of comparison, acceptance, rather than deeper values. And number four, do your children come home from school tired and cranky? It's a sign that their education experiences are not energizing but are debilitating. Number five, do children come home complaining about conflicts that they've had in school and unfair situations that they've been exposed to? This is a sign that your school does not have a proper process for conflict resolution and communication. Number six is, have your children lost interest in creative expression through art, music, and dance? These things are not encouraged in traditional systems today and not highly valued. They're considered secondary to academic areas. In some cases, courses are not even offered in these areas. This tends to extinguish these natural talents and abilities. Number seven, have your children stopped reading for fun or writing for pleasure? Are your children doing just the minimum for homework and going off in some escapist activity? It's a sign that these spontaneous activities are not being valued in the school. Another sign that people are losing their creativity. Number eight, do your children procrastinate to the last minute to do their homework? This is a sign that their homework is not very interesting, is not really meeting their needs, and is tending to extinguish their natural curiosity. Number nine, do your children come home talking about anything exciting that happened in school that day? If not, maybe nothing exciting is happening. Would you like to keep your job if it was like that? And number 10, did the school nurse or guidance counselor suggest that your children have some strange three-letter disease like ADD, and that they should now be given Ritalin or some other drug? I suggest that it is more probable that the school has the disease, EDD, Educational Deficit Disorder, and it's time to get your children out of that situation. So those are the 10 signs.
Well, that was certainly incredible, and we only have a few more minutes left, but could you just repeat them very quickly over again and tell us what their antithesis is? In other words, stop them from reading. They're not spontaneous anymore. Do the antithesis of it.
Well, the opposite is kids come home, being excited about school, that they want to talk to you about it, that they're having fun, that they can't wait to go back the next day. And by the way, this is the experience that people have in alternative schools. At my school, they actually, we ran as a democracy, and the kids actually had a rule that you can't stay after school unless you're good. And it was a serious rule. They even voted out some of the vacations, and they tried to vote out summer vacation once, and they actually passed a rule that we could meet once a week throughout the summer until about halfway through the summer the teacher said, forget it, we don't want to come in anymore.
Okay. So to run down the list then, be careful if your children don't like school, listen to them.
They don't like school, if they don't look you in the eye, if they are fixed on the kind of clothes and the designer labels and all that, if they come home cranky and tired, if they're complaining about conflicts, if they've lost interest in art and music, if they stop reading or writing for fun, if they procrastinate about their homework, if they don't have anything exciting to talk about, or if the nurse talks about ADD.
All right. So we've had, this is a very informative time for us, Jerry. We really appreciate everything. In our last few minutes, in our last minute here, do you have anything you'd like to sum up?
Well, I mean, we're here. We're a nonprofit organization. We're here to help people and help provide resources for them. If they, want more information, they can just call us at our 800 number, and that's 800-769-4171. Or they can go to our website and communicate to us that way. And the website is at www.edrev.org. That's EDREV.org.
Jerry, is EdRev the Encounter magazine? Is that the name it changed to? Or is that a different magazine?
Our magazine is called The Education Revolution.
Oh, okay. So that's a different one. I haven't received AERO in ages. I'm not on your mailing list anymore. Oh. Or EdRev, I've never seen that either. I'd like to be able to promote it if you kindly send me a copy.
Okay, sure. I'd be glad to do that.
And keep me on your mailing list for AERO. I really enjoyed receiving my publication monthly, but I haven't seen it for a very long time. You're going to put me on your mailing list?
Right, and if people would like a sample copy of AERO, they can certainly call our 800 number, and we'd be glad to send them a sample.
Okay, well, do me a favor, and as soon as you get off the phone today, please send me my sample. I'd love to trot it around with me wherever I go.
Okay, that's great.
And you are listening to Children Come First. This is Dr. Daria Brzezinski, WAAT, 750 AM on your radio dial. We are here every Tuesday from 10 to 11 a.m. talking about children and everything involved with children, education, preventative health, family living. We've been visiting today with Jerry Minitz, the director of the Alternative Education Resource Organization magazine, the Educational Revolution magazine radio program, who's done a lot of work in alternative education, homeschooling, and the like. And we thank you for joining us today, Jerry.
Well, it's been a pleasure.
And join us again next week when we will be visiting with other people who might be talking about something of interest to you regarding your children, education, prevention, family living, or if you have a suggestion or would like to call us, you may do so at 570-639-2931. That's 570-639-2931. Our address is email prokids, PROKIDS at RLC.net. That's prokids, PROKIDS at RLC.net. Thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next week again on our show. Thank you, and have a good day.